Hello there and welcome to this vlog of January 2023, and today's video is going to be on the exciting topic of licensing. So there you are, you've probably turned off immediately and are not going to hear anything else that I am going to say because licensing is a very commercial thing. It is very important though in anything that you've got like a hobby interest in, because whoever owns the IP that you are like really into will absolutely define what that is, amongst the kind of official releases, which therefore like supplements the community, things like that. So it's a really bad thing if your IP that you are into is owned by a terrible company or licensed to a terrible company. And I shouldn't say terrible, I should probably say a company that is overtly commercial or doesn't care about the fan base, or maybe cares too much about the fan base, and that's something that we'll get into a little bit here. Now, before I talk about any of this, because this is a sensitive issue, and we're going to veer onto several different topics, like what's recently happened at Wizards of the Coast. That is such a terrible name. Who comes up with that, right? It's just like far too many syllables. Anyway, Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, and kind of I want to veer into like the BattleTech situation because this is a BattleTech channel. I don't talk about anything non-BattleTech related, but if we do talk about things that are, outside of the realm of the inner sphere, then I will always bring it back to that. So we'll talk about that at the end in terms of the BattleTech license and the potential future around the BattleTech license issues that we are probably all aware of if you're watching this video, but if not, I'll break it down a little bit and go into some detail. Before I get into the kind of crux of what I want to talk about though, there are a couple of things that I have to caveat because I know that otherwise I'm going to get comment rage, which again, I've said this before, I don't care, you say what you want, but I've got to make this caveat point right off the bat. One, I have never played a game of Dungeons and Dragons ever in my life. I never want to, but I know exactly what it is. Obviously, I've got quite a few friends that play it, given how like active I am in tabletop gaming. I know Dungeons and Dragons is role playing, but the two are similar in a lot of respects, and it's like in BattleTech, for instance, we have both the tabletop game and the role-playing element of that game as well, and you get that quite a lot. I think people will adapt something that they're into a role-playing game or use a role-playing mechanic, things like that. So I know well what Dungeons and Dragons is. Never played it, not a role player. So, and that's really important because I don't come from this from an emotional attached area. So I am not the one who's having to, buy the products or, play twice weekly with friends and then be the either the victim or the beneficiary of the decisions that a major company are making, things like that. So I am very much on the outskirts of this debate. The second point as well is, and this will tie into what I'm going to discuss specifically, we have a major issue across the gaming community with groupthink. Not just the gaming community. This is something that really I find shocking actually about how the species has deteriorated over the last 20 years. And I think we can only put it down to like the internet and the echo chambers that exist in social media. And that's not necessarily part of the human condition. That is because of how the social media platforms work. So for instance, if you have got like a certain political belief and you just talk about that political belief over and over again, you will find that Google starts to send you articles that you agree with. I think that's incredibly dangerous. I know why Google do it, because they know that you're more likely to click on that article, and they're all about, the hits and the avenue rates and things like that. So I completely get it from a commercial standpoint, but I think socially it's incredibly dangerous to do that. And I think it's why, especially in the US, but it's getting worse in Europe as well, things are getting so divided and divisive. It's because we're losing the ability to hear from the legitimate other side, right? I'm not talking about the extremists on the other side, because that will push people further into their own enclave, right? Like if you're quite right wing and you see the, I don't know, left wing protesters shooting up and bombing cities and stuff like that, obviously that's going to make you more entrenched in your idea. But if you see someone who's just, like a bit, say, like a school teacher left winger who's got a very good and rational opinion on something, you won't see that because you're not getting it piped through to you through the media that you consume. Now, it's not exactly the same in wargaming because we don't really have news outlets like that to my knowledge. I mean, I don't really go on like get generic tabletop gaming news outlets, for instance, and I'm sure some of them do that. I'm sure some of them are, a little bit, there's a little bit of political agenda either way, but generally speaking, it's tabletop gaming, right? But what we do have then is we have the kind of the secondary problem of like the echo chamber issue that exists within social media. So it's not necessarily stuff that's getting piped to you directly through, news articles and things like that. It's just your followers on social media or the people that you follow are more likely to have the same view as you. So what you then have is you have this just like this cascade effect of like opinion, which, and I see it all the time, and I see very, very smart, rational people doing it who have just got like, the equivalency of like an opinion of the week because they've read it 50 times, and then straight away they'll just start regurgitating the same stuff. Just like, health warning here, right? That's really dangerous, right? I'm not talking about, forget about wargaming. Don't do that. Look into it yourself. I know we're all busy, but if you start parroting things online, there's no good that can come out of that for anyone, especially yourself, because you just enclave yourself further into a position. If I give a quick example of how this can be really dangerous, you'll often see like reactionary videos being posted online of like somebody getting attacked in the street or something like that. And then when you dig deeper into it, you realise that like the person who was attacking somebody was like abused in some way like minutes before, but you never saw that part of it. Yet people will then go on like a mob campaign of get that person, but you do not know the facts, right? You do not have the full picture. You've just got like a snippet of a video from somebody with an agenda. And you see this everywhere across, I mean, with my anthropology hat on now, because I'm obviously, did anthropology at university. I may or may not have discussed that before on this channel. But I remember one of my anthropology teachers saying to me, if you see a police person beating somebody up in the street, the chances are you'll fall into two camps. The first will be, oh my goodness, look at that poor person getting beaten by the authority of the state. Or you'll fall into the, well, they must have done something wrong to get a beating like that. So, like, and I suppose it's kind of said as a joke but that is how human brains work, right? Like, we attach our dogma and our idiosyncrasies onto situations. Exactly the same in this with what happened with Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro recently. So let's get into it anyway, because they're the kind of two caveats I want to put down before I start discussing this. So Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, I've got to say I'm not particularly impressed by either as companies. Like, and I don't engage with them too often. What I can say is that Wizards of the Coast, that name, my goodness, Wizards of the Coast. It might just be my accent that can't get around that, but it's so cumbersome. Anyway, they have the license for Axis and Allies, which I'm going to imagine is licensed from Hasbro as well, I presume. But I don't know, because Axis and Allies is quite a big like IP that goes back years and years. I mean, I had the original Axis and Allies back in the either the late 80s or the early 90s. Now, effectively, I recently, not that I got back into Axis and Allies, but I long lost my like original copy that I had when I was a kid. So I think it was a few years ago. One of my friends said, "Oh, we should get it and then just play it, whatever." So I've got it somewhere like in my like room next door, somewhere in the confines of all the shelving in there. Now I opened that box and was so disappointed. Like when you've had the original version as well, which is really really good quality. Like the little plastic units are really good quality. You get little plastic counters. The board looks really good. It's there's a lot of time and energy spent on it. I think on the original. The new version that Wizards of the Coast have put out is an absolute shadow of its former self. I think that the models are really not very good. The You get like cardboard counters instead of like the hard like plastic disc counters. When that's basically if you've got multiple units. So you put like a little soldier on top of it, and then if there are like 8 white discs below it, that means there are 9 soldiers in total on that particular landmass. That's how it works. But it just seemed to me so like amateur hour and cheap, and it's not. I mean, it's not an expensive game for sure, so I don't expect like anything amazing. But when you compare it to the original, it's really bad. In terms of Hasbro, the only interaction that I've had with them over the last few years was on the Hero Quest sets. Now, important to know, I do own and am a proud owner of the original Hero Set Quest. I have it. I have the original plus all the UK expansions. It's probably worth quite a bit of money actually because it's all in very good condition and I've painted it up like quite well. Anyway, there you are. I own the original Hero Quest and still rock it out every now and again. Now, recently, obviously, Hasbro have reimagined Hero Quest. I think was it MB? I think Milton Bradley that did the original version of Hero Quest. So they went under years ago. Obviously, Hasbro have picked up the license and then developed the game. They did that through a Kickstarter a few years ago. I never got it because it's literally an exact reprint of the original. A couple of differences. I think like you no longer get Familiars. You get like another creature instead of a Familiar. There might be a few other differences in as well that I'm not aware of. But the interesting thing that they did for me is that they created the US expansions as well, which were impossible to get when I was a kid. So there's like a I can't remember what it's exactly called now, but it's like a Winters one where you've got the Barbarian. There's then the one it's called like the Magic Mirror or something where it's like the Elf expansion. They're from the original game, but we literally I certainly never saw them in Games Workshop stores when I was a kid. I didn't even know they existed until a few years ago. So when they brought those out, I actually went and bought the Barbarian Winter one, which came out a few months ago, for the reason that I've never played it, and you can literally play the game on the old set, so it's the same map, same stats. So maybe not exactly, they might have changed some things, but you can certainly adapt it very easily into the game. The one thing that's slightly difficult about it is that and it's a very trivial thing, but the bases of all the monsters are now on circular bases, which I understand because circular bases are very much in the current zeitgeist of gaming. So I wouldn't have expected them on square bases. But I just find it a bit weird to play, when you've got square bases and circular bases alongside each other, especially because the original bases were meant to fit exactly on the board. These circle ones are. The new game might have a bigger board, so you might literally be able to get them in there, but it's slightly awkward with the old set. But again, that's really not relevant here. But I got that. I thought the quality was okay. Not gonna lie, like it's not a patch on the previous Hero Quest stuff. Now I don't consider myself like one of those old time gamer people who just complains about everything new. In fact, quite the contrary. But everything just looked a little bit too cartoony for me, and it you can tell that it's a Hasbro product. I'll put it that way. Another point as well, like I painted everything, right? So you get like several little minis in it, painted them all up. The plastics that it's made out of is just weird, right? Like it's not there to be painted, really. I don't think like even my rattle can was like struggling to kind of stick and do like a coat on the plastic. So to me, Hasbro are just like a multi-billion-dollar or I presume it'd be $1 billion anyway, like big corporate firm that don't really care about anything other than pumping out like relatively low quality material. Same for Wizards of the Coast. In my experience with them, they may have done some wonderful other projects I am aware of. I am not aware of, but I don't know. So that's my experience with both companies. And recently, obviously, there was a massive hoo-ha. And I'm not going to go into detail here because it has literally been documented to death. So I'll give you a very quick overview of it. I'm not going to go into too many of the stats. But then I'll give my like opinion on it for what it is worth. And then we'll get into the BattleTech situation. So, Wizards of the Coast announced several weeks ago that they were changing what they refer to as the OGL, the Open Gaming License. Now, what is that? Well, effectively, like some IPs will operate like that so that the community can develop the products and then, they can kind of monetize off it as well. Now, these agreements, I understand, were signed years and years ago. Subsequently, a lot of these companies have done some major like Kickstarter projects. Like you will get like Dungeons and Dragons Kickstarters that go like over $1 million, which is quite incredible. It's not official products, but that's how they've licensed it, and that's amazing. Obviously, I mean, with stuff like that, and I think for something like Dungeons and Dragons, which really is like a prominent brand. I mean, the brand rights alone on Dungeons and Dragons will be worth untold millions because, I mean, think of a game which is more well known across the world. Like, so I don't play it, but I know quite a bit about it just from like osmosis. You don't get that necessarily with things like, even like Warhammer, like 40k. I don't think the general person in the street knows what 40k is, but they do know what Dungeons and Dragons is, especially recently with the whole Stranger Things, like really kind of bringing it back into prominence. Anyway, so go back to the commercial side of it. This OGL change, which is what they've done recently, was very much skewered in favour of Wizards of the Coast and obviously then Hasbro because they're licensing it out. And what it said there was things like, if you, I think, I can't remember all the detail. And again, there'll be other YouTubers that have really documented this verbatim, but it will say things like, if you make over $750,000 on a Kickstarter, then we take a cut of that. Right? They've started to, what they've basically done is they've started to kind of infringe on the open aspect of their license, and they want to get the people doing it to give them a cut. There were also other like quite controversial things in there in regards like being able to take that IP. So someone could literally write like stories or whatever else, and Dungeons and Dragons IP owners could be like, "Yike, that's ours now, and we're going to monetize it." So like it's what you would refer to as a bit of a low blow move by a corporate against its community. I've got to say, the levels of like viscera and hatred being thrown at Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, though, were quite frankly ridiculous. And I'm going to document now commercially. So again, keep everything I'm saying here away from like the hobby aspect, the emotional aspect. We're going to talk the commercial aspect of why companies do things like this. And I'll also discuss, from my kind of, in my day job, which kind of, veers into a lot of things like PR and, business development, things like that. I'll give a little bit of an insight on, like, why, from a PR perspective especially, these companies are terrible at communicating their message, which is the problem here, really. I don't think it's got anything to do with the license change. I think done under better, like, in a better PR situation where you sell it better to like the general audience and the people with the open game licenses, this would not have kicked off like it did, but the communication's just not there. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then, while I'm saying everything here, I want you to keep in mind what I was saying previously about the online rage, groupthink thing that goes on. This is not me being a contrarian. This is just me giving you like a commercial idea of how companies will think about stuff like this. and then factor that into the equation of why they did what they did and why they did have a right to do what they did. It's just that they communicated it very, very badly. And I don't think, they just made an error. They made a tactical error, but we'll get into that anyway. So what we had here is, and this is how companies look at it, right? If you are unaware, if you've got an IP, so like let's say like Hasbro, which are a massive company, Hasbro absolutely will have an in-house lawyer team, and they'll obviously have like an accounts department, things like that. They probably also go and get one of the big four, so it'll be like Deloitte or Ernst and Young or PricewaterhouseCoopers, someone like that will come in, probably give them like a consultancy. So if you're unaware how that works, like there's the commercial aspect to accountants is the basically doing the auditing for firms, but it's quite controversial because the auditing generates commercial advice, right? It's a very, very thorny issue. I've got a lot of friends who work at the Big Four, like in like business development, marketing, things like that. And they will specifically tell me that these like two areas are, I think one of the Big Four recently, it may have been EY, but I can't remember, but one of them just decided to kind of separate the two because it's very contentious. You can kind of veer into all kinds of like legal regulatory issues and, people kind of accusing you of, it's not cheating per se, but it's almost like insider trading to some extent. It's difficult. I'm not going to go too far into that. It's way outside the remit of what we're talking about here. But what you'll have is with an accountancy like that will go in, maybe doing the accounts, and then off the back of that, they're going to the kind of exec because remember they have got a service to provide, and they'll go to them and they'll maybe like write them a paper or something, and it will say, do you know I've looked into your accounts and you are literally hemorrhaging X amount of $1 million a year because of the wording of this license. And I spoke about it with your in-house lawyer team. We've got lawyers, all the Big Four have lawyers as well, although I don't know if they necessarily get involved in things like that. But all these like professional services outfits, whether it's big law, big accountancy firms, all the financial services, we all know each other. We all talk to each other. I've got friends who work in all different manner of companies and areas, like globally and nationally, things like that. So it's not hard for you to get advice, is what I'm saying. And, it's not a million miles removed from the fact that, like, somebody, an accountant there, whether it's an internal accountant or someone doing, like, an external audit, would have kind of just gone to a relationship lawyer and said, just have a look at this for me because I think they're hemorrhaging money here. And then, collectively, the financial people will go to the exec or someone very senior at somewhere like Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro, and they'll say to them, look, if you change X and Y, we estimate you'll earn another $12 million, right? That's how it works. And that's how it should work because your interests as a commercial lawyer or a commercial accountant absolutely should align with your client. If they don't, you ain't doing your job properly, right? Exactly the same then for an IP lawyer who is charged with protecting your intellectual property. They will have something to say on this as well. And believe me, any IP lawyer worth their salt would be really, really quite shocked at the initial like licensing on that open gaming license, for the simple reason that you don't have any control over what those open gaming license people are publishing. It could be inappropriate content, for instance, and Dungeons and Dragons is something that, I believe, like, kids can play, right? So, like, not too young, because I think it's quite a detailed game, but I'm absolutely certain you'd get, like, 10, 11, 12-year-olds playing Dungeons and Dragons. Does that license, though, is there anything in there that protects them from someone not doing, like, a really raunchy or a really, like, sweary version of Dungeons and Dragons? I'm sure there are things in place to do that, and I'm sure they probably... I've got no idea. I've not researched this, but the fact of the matter is, it could happen. And given how like charged and politically charged the environment is at the moment in the world, where if big companies make like one mistake or are aligned with a company that make a mistake, you can get absolutely crucified for it. If I am the IP lawyer working for Hasbro or whatever, or they've got like a panel and they've got like an IP lawyer on there, If they do not raise this issue of you should change this, they are not doing their job correctly. And you must keep that in mind. This isn't some like Machiavellian company trying to squeeze like every dime or penny out of an IP. Yes, of course they do want to maximize profits. I'm not naive. But this is such a much more complex issue than your hobby. Okay, this is so much more. There are so many more levels to this going on that people don't know. So the clickbait attitude to this, or if you go and like watch a channel who talk about this, and if they are just like burying Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro and saying they are big evil corporates and the little guys getting trounced, I couldn't disagree with that anymore. Like ultimately, how much money have Hasbro or had to pay for the D&D license? And then to sub-license that out to Wizards of the Coast, how much do they pay for it? This is a multi-million-pound industry. You've got people's careers, people's reputations, people's livelihoods operating here. And if you do not do everything you can to protect that IP, you are not good custodians of it. Right? So again, beyond all the emotional rhetoric of the hobby, a company has a right to do that. They bought the license and should do that. Now, all that being said, let's get into what happened. So, in terms of this particular case, and I'll tie that into BattleTech and BattleTech's future a little bit. And again, I've been following this passively, but then last week it was discovered, or maybe early this week it was discovered that they've now pulled they came up with they wanted to do this license. That license is now gone. This new variant of the license, and they've decided to kind of informally apologise. I don't know if they formally or informally apologise, but like they're not going to do this anymore because the fallout from it, the brand damage from it was so bad, was so horrific, they just pulled the plug. That is not the fault of the accountants or the lawyers. They have just highlighted an issue. Where that's a massive failure is in the communication of the change to the influencers and the decision makers in the community. Now, this is where I get really perplexed with these big companies. I mean, I work for previously anyway, in my history, I've worked for big law firms, like global law firms. But we're not big firms, right? Like in the grand scheme of things, like the biggest law firm I've worked for might have between 7,000 and 8,000 people operating globally, worldwide in it. Now, for a company that's small, there are some companies out there who will hire like millions of people, right? Law firms are never that big. So I've never worked in a major firm. Like usually within a law firm, you even in a massive global like that, you'll get to know a lot of people, and it's not so big and so faceless. In companies like Hasbro and Wizard of the Coast, I'd imagine Wizard of the Coast will be relatively small. I'd imagine. I'm guessing hundreds of staff potentially. Hasbro will be bigger. So, but you're not talking about massive firms here. But they still will have like PR teams, marketing teams. And people doing like communications. And see, at a law firm, in the teams that I've worked in, if we were going to do something that we knew was going to be massively controversial, we wouldn't just drop it. Like, oh yeah, we're changing all our rates with the clients, for instance, right, or something like that. You drip feed that through, and you must kind of communicate that well in advance and have that open discussion about why. So. Let me give you an example. I'll give you a very, very... It's interesting if you're interested in commercial things. If you're not, you've turned off by now, so I might as well say it. In law firms, you have this issue with secondments. So what happens is you'll be working for like one of the big banks, and what they'll do is like, you'll have a trainee or a junior associate, so just a lawyer basically, and the bank will come and say, can we have a secondee for a year? And the law firms... They like doing this to some extent because the trainee will, or the lawyer, whatever, the newly trained lawyer, whatever, will go in there, and the theory is this: that they will go in, they will kind of build up a reputation for the hosting law firm in that team. They'll be able to do the networking. They'll then keep the client happy. They'll then come back into the law firm much more savvy about the internal workings of that, in this case, a bank. And that's very good for business development. So the partner can then kind of use that associate to kind of get liaise and get intel and, stuff like that. Basic like networking, business development 101. The problem is this, though, that for law firms, that is so expensive. Like you give one lawyer to a firm as a secondee, you lose the opportunity cost, not only of like that person has gone out of the team so can't generate fees anymore, but it's the opportunity cost of those fees. So you have this like massive double whammy. So it will literally leave potential like a £300,000 black hole in the client relationship when you factor in everything of the cost, right? Because usually as well, it's the host law firm who will be paying the salary. So it's the salary plus the fees that they've lost for not working you for a year. That can be a lot of money for a law firm. And when you've got when you get the kind of the black and white audit back at the end of the year about the profitability of a client, if a bank have had like 3 secondees, you will literally be losing money with them, right? It's that bad. Yeah, you're kind of in the red with them. And then it's like, oh my goodness, what is the point in us having this client? They're costing us money, right? Complicated though, and it is much more complicated than that, because your kind of aim is to always kind of grow that client. So you can spend that money one year and then next year you kind of, bump up and try and really kind of grow the client, improve the relationship. So it's complex, and it's not anything like as intrinsic and easy as I was kind of relating there. It's there's a lot going on with stuff like that. But what I would suggest is that you've got to, in a way, like you've got to see beyond the like how firms will then operate commercially within their own audience and how that PR goes out. So in that case with the bank, for instance, we would go to the bank and say, look, we love doing the secondee thing, but it's hammering our profits so much with you. It's really difficult for us to justify it. So you're going to have to give us more work, right? Or we're going to have to put our prices up. And if you wanted to do that with a bank, you'd literally set in motion multiple like meetings and liaisons and things of that nature. The problem is, though, that what Wizards of the Coast did was just drop this hugely controversial topic of, here you are, here's a new license, which is technically, I think there's been a lot of legal talk on this as well, like can they legally do this? And it looks ambiguous. So outside of that, and if that is ambiguous and they can't do it, then you've got to kind of give heat to the lawyers at that situation. But just in general of how this works, you see, if I was doing this, I would have got all my big developers, the independent developers, round in a room, round a table, whatever, and I would have said to them all, look, we've got to think about our brand reputation here. We've got to think about the future proofing of the business and monetizing. So let's talk about how we rework this for it to work for all of us. So I wouldn't have, for instance, ever pitched to them that I could just go in and steal their idea. I think that's a horrific thing to do to someone who's passionate about your brand and wants to make it work. But I absolutely would have gone to them and said, like, look, we are licensed on this. We are paying for that license. We all need to make well off this, right? It can't just be us. It can't just be you. And at the moment, it's not working for us. If they'd have gone to them and said that, and then basically said, look, when this comes out, we know the community might go a bit nuts about it, but can we get like a handshake that you're all going to put good comms out about it, and on your, whether it's a YouTube channel or whatever else, you can all go on there and say, look, there were problems on this, it were difficult discussions had, but ultimately we think this is for the best of the the future of D&D as a brand, and that's what we are concerned with. It's not just about the money side of it. We had very open, frank discussions with them. They put their comms out to us very early. We've been discussing this for months and months. You are going to get leaks and stuff like that. That's inevitable, but you don't have to drop it as brutally as they did, which was the mistake, and it's the mistake all firms make. And I think it's a general misunderstanding of how PR and buzz works, and especially like in the online sphere. So the accountants and the lawyers who don't naturally know things like that will just kind of flash the cash to the execs, and the execs' eyes will be bigger than their belly, and they'll be like, ooh, money. And then when they release it, it turns out to be a disaster. If you've got someone who knows I bet if you spoke to any like prominent D&D character, they would have said like, yeah, that's a bad idea. That will really, really upset the community. They clearly didn't do that, and that's the problem. That's why people get upset. Anyway, that's my thought on it anyway, for what it's worth. Very quickly now, we're just going to discuss BattleTech, because I can't not discuss BattleTech on this channel. That would be heresy. The BattleTech IP, if you are unaware, is very, very complex. Now, it's owned between three entities. So Topps own the tabletop and the book license, I think. Definitely tabletop. I think they must have the books because Catalyst published the books, and Catalyst sub license out from Topps. Disney, weirdly enough, they bought the company that had are they called Sabian or something? I can't remember the name. They own the rights to any like films or TV shows, I believe. And the third and final one is Microsoft, and that's to me the biggest part of this license because they own the gaming side of it. So when you've got the computer gaming side of it, so when you're playing like MechWarrior 5 or the Hairbrained Scheme game, that's been licensed out by Microsoft at some level. I could be wrong on the Hairbrained Scheme one. Certainly for MechWarrior, but I'm not sure if there's a difference in. I'm guessing, yeah, it must be because Mech Commander 2. Which was kind of a more tactical game, that's owned by Microsoft and was developed by Microsoft. So the licensing for BattleTech is very, very complex. It's the reason why we've never had a TV show or a film because big studios do not like to touch like split IPs like that. It's a layer of complexity they just don't need. As well, like if you think about like Disney, like they are so like prominent with how they. With the IPs that they've got things like Star Wars and Marvel. I mean, they're really kind of money makers. So, do we really think they're going to delve into, a 30-year-old mech like IP to make a show? Probably not. Or they might do. I mean, if BattleTech really took off, then they might do. But I think it's quite a difficult sell. But what I wanted to discuss a little bit today is not so much anything other than the Topps license, because the other two I don't know too much about because I never really delved into it. But I do know quite a bit about what's going on, obviously, in Topps and Catalyst Game Labs. And I think I read somewhere recently, I can't remember where this was, but I think when Catalyst took over the BattleTech IP, it was like the tabletop one. It was literally worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was nothing. In the grand scheme, I mean, if your IP is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, yeah, that's not good. It's now subsequently, like post the Kickstarters and everything that's gone over the last like 3 or 4 years, it's now worth well into the millions. So it's grown exponentially over a pretty short period of time as well. And what I wanted to just kind of discuss was I don't know anything about this license, right? So I don't know what the terms are. Like, did Catalyst, do they have to renew it every 2 or 3 years? I've got no idea. At the moment, I mean, if it is something like that, there's no way in hell I think that short-term Catalyst will be relieved of the license. The only thing that could undercut them is if a much bigger company came in and wanted to, give a lot more money. I'll give you a really extreme example here. If Games Workshop wanted to buy the BattleTech IP, which ain't going to happen, but let's just say something like that happened. Obviously, Games Workshop have got a massive, their model, the model side of their business is just, it's just light years in front of anything that Catalyst could do, and that's nothing to do with Catalyst because they're a small company. Games Workshop ain't a small company, really. In gaming pounds, they're huge. They've got their own factories, they've got their own distribution sites. Catalyst are really reliant on, third-party factories in Asia and shipping and Games Workshop shipping as well. But what I'm saying is, if a company like that went in for the BattleTech IP, you probably that might turn Topps' head. But I don't know I don't know the ins and outs of it. So they might have things written into the legal contract that they're not allowed to give it to any rival companies for X amount of years. All the kind of legalities on this will have been sorted out. So I do think that it will be in and around Catalyst for a long, long time. The people there have obviously really committed to it and done a fantastic job. But who knows? And one of the reasons I wanted to do this video and then segue off into the BattleTech IP is we are just all a leaf on the wind of this commercially. Like there are conversations going on in the corridors of powers at Topps and within Catalyst as well that we are not privy to. So if one day you wake up and just discover, oh, the license is now owned by another company, or they've changed this and it's massive going to change how I interact with it, that can happen. I hate to tell you that, but we are just customers and clients of a service here, we do not have the risk. We don't, we've not put our private money into this. And I just leave you with this thought. Just keep your mind open to things like that before you kind of get on the, the online mob attack train of, oh, thing bad, because everybody says so. It's usually a lot more complex. It's not always about evil corporate executives trying to, wrangle every penny out of a customer base. They're much smarter than that. If you did that to a customer base, you would destroy your company very quickly. So you might make a really big profit, like for a few months, but it's not sustainable. Eventually, you'd just annoy people, and the competition would do it better than you, and then you die. Any company that did that is an idiot company, right? I don't, Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, as I said, they're not companies I particularly enjoy engaging with, but they're not idiots. They're very smart what they do. They're both very profitable companies. They're not sat there in the corridor, in their big fancy exec rooms, like twiddling their fingers saying, how do we rip people off this month? It's bad business development. It's bad business practice. What they want to do, they want to protect their IP, they want to grow the IP, and they want to monetize their profits and turnovers off the back of it. Like anyone would in business. If you owned a company, you'd be trying to do the same. Anyway, on that contrarian video, because it is contrarian, I'm absolutely aware of that. What I'm saying here is not part of the zeitgeist. I mean, the levels of heat getting thrown at Wizard of the Coast are quite frankly like nuclear levels. So it all looks quite brutal. Anyway, there you are. There's my 2 pennies worth on it. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll hopefully catch you again next time.